Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode for you guys today. So we're going to jump right into it. I've got two questions from K-Max about woke. You know, we always try to limit it to two questions per Cognitive Elite member, but today we're gonna, because they're combined, so we're gonna say it's just one question, and we'll answer his other question today as well afterwards. But his questions primarily deal with woke, corporate wokeness, Cracker Barrel, and I know we had an article yesterday about Cracker Barrel, but there's a lot more to discuss about Cracker Barrel and what it means for the state of woke, which I didn't really cover in my article yesterday. I covered a lot of other topics, so we're going to discuss that. He also asked about Netflix as an example of peak woke, pointing to the new Jussie Smollett documentary and some other pro-black content that they do. So we're going to combine that question into how corporations are treating woke and whether this is, because I've been talking about this as one of my topics, is that woke is in retreat. And it definitely is, compared to what things were like in 2021. In 2021, they were capable of getting several corporations and the MLB to boycott Georgia simply because Georgia passed an election reform bill. And MLB boycotted the All-Star game, took the All-Star game out of Georgia over this political move, and several other corporations started to consider boycotting the state as well. This is one of the more insane examples of peak wokeness, and every company sending out Black Lives Matter propaganda, and every sports league is turning itself into a Black Lives Matter propaganda vehicle. You had a lot of pro teams boycott playing over the Jacob Blake shooting. I think it was Jacob Blake. I think that was the guy. It was a black guy in Kenosha who was trying to pull out a knife on a cop and got shot. And you had several pro teams that boycotted it. And this carried on it really up until Bud Light, even though I mocked the Bud Light boycott at the time. I want to note is that I'm not mocking the Cracker Barrel boycott. There's just a silly aspect to it, which I cover in yesterday's article, which I'll go into briefly today. But if you guys want to know my points about Cracker Barrel, there's an incredible article on Substack for you guys to read. But in April 2023, spring of 2023, there began to be a pushback with the Bud Light boycott. A lot of companies began scaling back their Pride Month celebrations starting in 2023. A lot of these companies are no longer, sending out anti-Trump messages like they were in the first term, or they're trying to curry favor with Trump. And a lot of them have eliminated the overt aspects of DEI, but a lot of them have rephrased the DEI departments to like belonging and inclusion, or some type of office of belonging. Belonging is generally becoming the new term rather than DEI, but they are trying to scale back some of the white privilege training and other things. And a lot of them have dropped their explicit racial preferences, and they've had a bunch of internship programs and fellowship programs designed specifically for minorities that discriminate against whites. They have decided to scrap a lot of those initiatives, and also fundraising for certain black groups such as Black Lives Matter and others. So there has been a scale back, but it's not entirely there. So when you say woke is in retreat, you're not saying that woke is dead. There's a big difference. It's more of a scaled back wokeness, and we're seeing that in various expressions. I think the best example would be the NFL. NFL is the core culture of America, the core cultural element of America. The Super Bowl is our chief cultural festivity. Over 100 million Americans watch it. We have all these advertisements that are set up for it. It is the most talked about event for weeks leading up to it. Everyone is, supposed to have some knowledge of it and talk about it the next day at the office water cooler. It is our chief cultural festivity, our cultural event. It's along with Christmas and Thanksgiving. that it ties Americans together. And July 4th. If you could say the four big holidays, it would be Christmas, Thanksgiving, July 4th, Super Bowl Sunday, I would have to say. And so the NFL, what they do signifies the state of the culture and how corporations are treating this. And Roger Goodell and their executives are very keen on pleasing the audience and ensuring that they keep the majority of their fans watching. And they recently announced that they're going to keep in racism and choose love and some I think there's like stop hate, these stencils in the end zone. They're also expanding the number of male and transgender cheerleaders. Now, how many? There's like a handful, but still, a handful is a lot more than zero. And that's a lot more noticeable. And clearly, I don't know what fans are into this, but they're still going along with it. So there is still that element of wokeness there. But I mean, when you look at the in racism, sometimes you can have trouble or struggle with saying, "Oh, that's a political statement." Like, what's wrong with that? Are you saying that being pro racism is conservative or a political message? And they would just say it's just a blanket statement stating the values of America, that we're opposed to racism and hate. And that would be the argument to make for it. And you could theoretically make that argument. I mean, very few people outside of online right-wing Twitter is going to make a pro-racism argument or declare themselves to be racist. People in the real world, even people with racial views, are going to try mightily to say that they're not racist. So when you say in racism, it's just a blanket statement of stating our obvious values as 21st century Americans to say this. But those elements are there, that there's still a degree of wokeness. So if that's found in the NFL, then it's still there. And, with K-Max bringing up Netflix, yeah, they still put out woke documentaries of other sorts and are still there. But I mean, Netflix has a broad array of things. I wouldn't say that they're peak woke. I mean, their big cultural product that they put out this summer was Happy Gilmore 2, which I'm not going to say is anti-woke. It's more of just a slop film, but it's designed for people who would likely vote for Donald Trump. And they love this movie. I saw the preview for Happy Gilmore 2, and I'm like, this looks like the worst movie I have ever seen. But they've been putting out these Adam Sandler slop films that liberal writers always mock and say they suck, but they're finding an audience out with middle America. Every Adam Sandler shit film that Netflix has put out over the last decade, a lot of them are forgotten about. I know they made a big deal, but they've been the biggest hits on Netflix. So it's not, I wouldn't, it's not like they're doing, trans Adam Sandler, comedy specials, or like saying that they found like a trans Adam Sandler type comedian and then allowing that person to make movies and they're endlessly promoting it. It's more that they're giving really and a lot of what the anti-woke crowd or some of the mainstream sentiment against it is that we want the slop back. And I have to say, slop is still better than wokeness. So if you're choosing, we'll go with slop. But they're like, we want slop without politics. We just mindless entertainment. And they're getting that with the Adam Sandler stuff. Now, when it comes to Cracker Barrel and the rebrand, K-Max is saying that, it'd be like if Ben and Jerry's changed their logo to be, left or right wing or some sort. I don't really think that's the case. One is that Ben and Jerry's, the people behind it, have always been very active left wing advocates and activists of a sort, much more so than any other company. Cracker Barrel is red coded because, it's a restaurant designed for heartland Americans or people in rural America who tend to vote Republican or conservative. And similar way with Chick-fil-A, and they've had some Christian themes and other things with Cracker Barrel in similar way, maybe less overt than Chick-fil-A, but there are those things. But these are companies that are wanting to expand their market demographic, and Cracker Barrel claims that they're struggling right now, so they need a rebrand. And instead of going woke, because it's not really specifically woke, they're just going to a homogenized, sterile logo. It's not like they put a trans black woman in the logo or changed it to pride colors. It's simply that they made themselves less distinctive, which is part of this general corporate trend to eliminate any distinctions and have a standard homogenized type among all corporations. And you can even see this with the type of buildings they now have. There used to be these distinctive type of structures that came with these restaurants, Pizza Hut with a hut and other things. And, all the old Blockbuster chains had a distinctive building structure. Now, pretty much every building is the same. Whether you're a fast food restaurant, a sit down chain, a Verizon store, whatever, it's the same type of shop. And the reason why they do this is that they build these with the intent that whoever is renting that storefront or owning that storefront for the time being isn't going to be there forever, and it makes it better for resale value if it's just a generic box. And so everyone's trying to fit in with that as well. And so Cracker Barrel is one of those places where they have a distinctive building structure, which hurts its resale value if they close shop. So they want to move to a generic type where it makes it easier to sell it off to another company. And that's part of it. It's more of a lame corporate rebranding that eliminates any of the distinctive features that made Cracker Barrel Cracker Barrel. It's not specifically woke. But they feel it's woke because they think it's an attack on Americana and the heartland and our distinctive traditions and culture and heritage, which it is funny that they, as I made point in my article yesterday, is that the fact that conservatives think this is our heritage and culture is silly, but they are right in that there's not, any other type of cultural institution that can extol some of this long forgotten rural Americana. And for a lot of red-coated people, this is their place to go. It's like their favorite restaurant to go on after church or have a Sunday dinner with their grandparents or something. And they have memories tied to it. But in terms of like the Americana it evokes, that Americana is ultimately long dead for many people. It's like a Disneyland attraction rather than a genuine expression of culture and organic identity. But it is what it is. That's what people have. So that's why they're like, this is taking our culture and heritage, and they're going to make it generic and turn it into like a Chili's of some sort. And so that's more of their people's problem rather than say, it's specifically going woke. Now, Cracker Barrel does have woke policies. They still do DEI and that type of stuff. And I think it's worth the fight over this and to make a stand against DEI and also who they're elevating. I mean, their female executive they have, the female CEO who did this, clearly doesn't share the values that made Cracker Barrel a success and doesn't understand their consumer demographic. And she was clearly elevated due to her gender, not due to talent or merit. And you can see this by this horrible Brie brand that everyone thinks is stupid. So it was a terrible business decision, but whether it's specifically woke, I don't think that is the case. And, it's not comparable to Ben & Jerry's because Cracker Barrel is not run by conservative activists in the same way that Ben & Jerry's is. And, it's not, I don't know what Ben & Jerry's doesn't have like a woke brand. It's not like they have like a rainbow colored logo with like a black power fist, and that somehow they then turned it into I don't know, like red, white, and blue, and like a Marine saluting, in their logo. And that didn't even really happen with Golden, or I almost called it Golden Corral, Cracker Barrel. They just made it a generic homogenized logo, and it was greeted with derision by the public. But I think even outside of that, despite it not being specifically woke, it's still a telltale sign that woke isn't dead. Because if you look deeper into Cracker Barrel, into other chain restaurants, into a lot of these other corporations, they're still doing a lot of the similar woke policies, just scaled back under different names, maybe less aggressive than they were doing 3 or 4 years ago. So it's a sign that there's a lot of wokeness still deeply built into our system that we have. And it's just there. I mean, when you look at the elite world and the institutions, they still promote a lot of this stuff. And a lot of the people are graduating from elite law schools. A lot of the people who are running HR departments, a lot of the people who are involved in marketing, they still have this left-wing mindset. And they're still subject to promoting this type of nonsense to the public in any way they can. Whether that's specifically the case in Cracker Barrel, I think that stuff isn't directly tied to the rebrand, but you can still uncover that stuff when you're looking into the chain. Now, the reason why conservatives are upset is that it's simply that this is their culture. This is seen as an assault on the rural or the heartland ideal they have, which is exemplified by Cracker Barrel, even though it's not authentic or organic expression of that mythical heartland America that conservatives like to extol. I still think that it's an attack on it. And a lot of people are pissed because they want to go. They want the rocking chairs outside on the porch. They want the knickknacks in the store. They want the appearance of having down home cooking and the aesthetic. And they feel like that aesthetic is being taken away from them. And so they revolt. Even though you could say that this is like a mom and pop store being closed down in favor of some generic restaurant chain. This is the generic restaurant chain that's changing itself, that's eliminating the artifice of it being local, organic, and connected to the people that are going there, are connected to the community that it's a part of. That's not really the case. This is a chain restaurant where it's the same no matter where you are, whether you're in Wisconsin or Arkansas. But it's just that this is their understanding of genuine, true red state American culture, and the fact that they might eliminate that makes them angry. And so that's part of the revolt of it. And it just seems woke in itself, even if it's not explicitly woke. So, but yeah, the point is like, I always make this take is that people attack me and they're like, oh, you think is woke is dead, or woke is in retreat. Woke is without a doubt in retreat. I mean, I remember even compared to the late 2010s, it seems that the culture and society we have is less hysteric and less woke than it wasn't even in the first Trump term. You'd have to go back probably to 2015. It really feels like it's different from 2015, but it feels like a rewind to 2015. There's also just more acceptance of right-wing radical discourse in society. What's going viral on social media, people always we want to go back to pre-2017 social media. Well, the thing is, even at the high point of the alt-right, we were not getting our content reaching anywhere near the amount of people that right-wing content is now reaching, not just through Twitter, but through Reels and TikTok. That content is really taking off in a huge way that it was never taking off even back in 2016. And so that's like in the woke days, they wouldn't have allowed that. They would have censored it. They would have only allowed the horrific woke content that we were subject to in 2020 and 2021. And even that was the case in the late 2010s. And there's just a few other things that just feel a lot different, is that people don't seem to take this propaganda as seriously as they once did. And it's not like you're seeing corporations that are wanting to make explicit political statements, such as, the Nike ads they did with Colin Kaepernick in 2018, which actually came out around the time of my docs, which is a funny timing. But, that was an explicit political statement. And corporations are not as interested in explicit political statements, even if they maintain a lot of that DEI infrastructure or woke infrastructure that's built in. But we're still acknowledging how much this stuff is very embedded within our system, whether it's in academia, whether it's in the textbooks that kids are learning from in public schools, or whether corporations still try to have racial favoritism and anti-white hiring practices, it's still worth looking into. It's not saying that woke is dead. It's saying that woke has been scaled back to a degree, but a lot of that wokeness is still embedded within the structure and system. To borrow a term from the left and turn into our things, there's still systemic wokeness, but it's less obtrusive and less explicit and less seemingly onerous and imposed on people than it would have been a few years ago. And that's true without a doubt. If you took a time machine back to 2021, you would think that we are living in a golden age compared to then. It's only due to the fact that people have short memories and forget about a lot of the stuff, or they haven't reached a point that they feel is fully anti-woke that they would believe it's not there. But we still have those elements. I mean, even to compare with like the public reaction to Trump's immigration moves, which some people say he's not doing enough, but I mean, they're far more aggressive than what he was doing in the first term. But in the first term, there was much more opposition towards it, and they were able to scuttle the limited moves he had. Meanwhile, he's sending, he's trying to send National Guard into like every major city and have a huge crime crackdown there. This was unthinkable in the first term, and they're having mass ICE agents swoop all over the country trying to find migrants. A lot of this stuff could have never been done in the first term. And it is, and even though there's public polling isn't really on the side of Trump on this, most of the public's just shrugging their shoulders and moving on with their lives. And they're just focused on other things. It's not so much that America has veered from, a leftist woke hellhole to a reactionary, strong authoritarian state, and now all Americans are based. It's more that Americans have shifted from caring to not caring. They're apathetic. They just want to focus on the bread and circuses. They want to focus on sports betting. They want to focus on smoking weed, etc. And they don't really care about this stuff as much as they did a few years ago. They're much more politically engaged a few years ago than they were. And the fact that Americans are not as hyper political as they once were has allowed for wokeness to recede, and it's much harder to make peak woke continue like it did following the George Floyd revolution. So that is my take on that. And so we'll answer his other question. K-Max, he said, I'm not trying to get too discouraged. I noticed a Substack ranking showing that 9 out of the top 10 Substacks were all liberal Substacks. I don't know why he's putting a dash between sub and stacks, but whatever. Even the most prominent dissident right person I can think of, Ann Coulter, is ranked 93rd. Do our people not read it all and just listen to or watch podcasts, or are numbers just smaller than I think they are? How big a problem is this for our side? Well, the people who read, it's generally older crowd. Like, I think Substack is primarily Gen Xers, and what they want to read is, it's not so much liberal material, it's more center material, because there's a lot of big IDW people, like even in the top 10 even in the top 10 rankings that they had, there are people who are not so much right wing. I mean, the top 2 are the Free Press and the Bulwark. I mean, Bulwark is pretty libtarded now. Free Press is not, even though I know a lot of people don't like Free Press. Midas Touch, Andy Borowitz, Paul Krugman, Mehdi Hassan, the Contrarian, which is hilarious. That is everyone mocked it, but it's Jen Rubin and Norm Eisen's Substack. When it came out, like, no one wants this, and now it's ranked number 5. And Jen Rubin is a former, she's just a neocon who has just gone straight deranged libtard, and so is Norm Eisen, and that's number 5. But you also have Matt Taibbi there, who is number 9. Nate Silver is rather middle of the road. Matt Iglesias would still be probably liberal, but not a little bit different. Andrew Sullivan's in the center, who's in the top 20. But if you look at it, it is mostly center or to the left. And Free Press is center right, and it's number 1. Obviously, a lot of us don't like it. Sometimes they do have good material. I mean, one of the things is they're obsessed with being pro-Israel, but they are number one. They do have interesting content. They do have fairly good articles about everything that's not related to Israel. So it's still number one. Bulwark occasionally has some okay stuff. I would still describe it more as a center operation, even though they can have deranged libtards writing for it. I would not describe it as a conservative operation, but those are the big ones. And they're generally directed towards an older audience, is that most of the right is younger, under 40. And a lot of our people just don't like to read because they like to listen to podcasts and they like to watch videos. They are not sitting down to read. One thing to note is that a lot of our people think our side are big readers. They're not. I always point back to this thread where, somebody was, saying our people don't read. They'd rather weld in their free time. And then someone said is like reading is for fags and actually is a sign of being an idiot. And then I just tweeted it. I was like, books are for bugmen. And then all these people were like, that's so true. Actually, true smart people don't read. They don't read at all. Reading too much is bad for you. And this is clearly, cope because our side doesn't bother to read. Thing is, it's like sometimes better that they don't read. That they can read some stuff and they aren't smart enough to comprehend this material, and then they go crazy and just have wrong assumptions. So it's probably better. But really what our side likes to do is they like to watch streamers and watch the viral content. And when it comes to short viral content, whether it's on X or TikTok or Reels, we're blowing the people who are huge on Substack out of the water. Like, there is not viral material being promoted by the Contrarian or Steve Schmidt or any of these never Trumpers or libtards. They have no presence on the platforms that are primarily used by people under 40. And a lot of people are just getting their information from tweets and these short clips that are passed around on TikTok and Reels. And this is where the right wing is thriving, is where people are consuming short bits of information that, they go through another video after a minute, or they're just scrolling down and they're seeing tweets and memes. That's where the right wing is thriving. Blue Sky does not have nearly the audience that any of these other platforms have. They're not getting viral memes out there. Pretty much every meme is still the work of right wingers. And that's how we're communicating our information, through memes, through posts, through tweets or zeets, whatever you want to call them now, and short clips. We're not conveying our material through essays and articles. That's just not how our audience likes to consume material. And we're spreading material through streams and maybe podcasts to an extent. Generally, when it comes to podcasts, we're doing much better. If you look at a lot of the big Spotify podcasts, they're all, right wing, or generally right-ish wing. It's more that just the written word is primarily still the domain of liberals. And even with the type of podcast they offer on Substack, I guess they're more of a restrained, moderate angle. They're not quite the no holds bar. They're not broadcast and they're not the streamers. They're a more tame brand for it. And I just think it's primarily for an older crowd. It's for people over 40 and the people who grew up reading, and that's still how they like consuming information. But especially for Gen Z, that's not how they consume information. They want short bits of information, and that's where the right wing is thriving. So it's just a different material. Also, you just don't have many big name individual writers. Is that if you were a talented person for a right winger, you didn't develop yourself into a writer. You developed yourself into a podcaster and a streamer. That's just how it is. I guess I'm like the one opposite to maybe people. Well, some people think I'm a better writer than podcaster. I'll leave it up to the audience. But I don't do video streams. I just talk into a microphone and you don't see my face, which a lot of people get mad about. But that's what we're doing for the time being. And so most of those people develop their energies elsewhere. When it came to writers, they have not developed that many talented people under 40. even with mainstream conservatives. I mean, if you look at like the dissident right, there's no real talented writers under 40. You know, and some people you might say, oh, well, James Kirkpatrick, Gregory Hood, Kevin Deanna, it's all the same person. He's in his 40s. And generally, those people who are focused on writing, you would have had to develop your talents or been around pre-Trump, because that's how we primarily were developing our skills, or what we we're focused on was writing. We weren't really podcasting that much, and we certainly weren't streaming. There was much more of an anonymous angle, and the best way to be anonymous was just to write. If you have your voice, and obviously if you have your face out there, that's not really helping you, but most people haven't developed themselves to writing. And I even noticed that when people return back who are sort of older members of the old right, they devote themselves just to videos and podcasts. They aren't really writing that much. And even I noticed this with most of my audience. My audience primarily wants the podcast. They don't. They're not as eager for the articles, which is why I haven't been, which I'm now is not as committed to putting out 2 articles a week, because it seems that the audience just wants to ensure that they have the 3 podcasts a week, and 1 article is nice, but they're not as coming back for it. So I just think it's a difference in what the right wing wants. I mean, there is this point that Richard Anania made, and people don't like Richard Anania, but it is true. It's that, you know, liberals read, conservatives watch TV, but it's also that liberals read, and conservatives watch streams or listen to podcasts. They're not a big reading demographic. And even if you look at a lot of the best-selling books that are like politics books, it's all generally liberals. It's very hard for conservatives to make a big selling book, because our audience doesn't read. And the audience that does read are ancient. There are people buying Bill O'Reilly's latest Killing the SS or Killing Patton or whatever book. And that's something that nobody on the online right is reading. So it's just a different change in audience and what our audience wants. And our audience wants visual content and auditory content much more so than they do want, you know, written content. It is what it is, but it to the point is that there was a lot of these people like, why is no one financing a big publication? One, they do finance big written publications. They might just the problem is they're not financing you. And they finance American Conservative, they finance Chronicles, they finance Free Press, they finance all these various publications. But people are like, why don't they do this more? But they just want them to finance these people. But there's just not that much of an audience. There's not that much of an audience for the written word among right wingers. So, well, hopefully I disprove it. Hopefully we get more people reading me. and I have a best-selling book next year, so maybe I can defy the odds. But I'm aware of what our audience wants and is into, and they're generally not into reading as much as liberals are. It's not saying that liberals are smarter. I'm just saying that it's, they prefer that kind of content over what conservatives are. And so Richard Nanani's point that like liberals read, conservatives watch TV is very true. So that is K-Max's questions. We'll move on to let's see. I think we'll go to Costco Frank. He had a question about this, or just a random question. He said, do you find it ironic that establishment historians have become irrelevant in a diverse America? It's hard to imagine any immigrant buying a book by Doris Kearns Goodwin, Douglas Brinkley, or Ron Chernow. Yet these same historians went all in on the demographic consequences of Obama, Biden, Harris. I don't know. They're still best-selling writers and authors. It's just that they're not reaching, to go back to the other point, they're not reaching a younger audience. It's primarily people over 40 who are reading. People under 40 don't read. But they're still influential among old people. And generally, people who are over 40 are high-propensity voters. They're the ones that you always have to reach out and win. And they're still having best-selling books. But it's more that there's a smaller book buying public. But whatever book buying public there is, it's among older libtards. And so if you are wanting to get people to buy your book, you have to be in that framework of what it is. And so they're still influential, and they still go on the cable news. Doris Kearns Goodwin goes on like MSNBC all the time. So they're not irrelevant. They're still relevant in a diverse America. It's just that probably fewer people are reading them. But if they want to be read, they have to fit in that category. If you want to be a Bill O'Reilly, I guess, would count as a conservative historian, even though it's very much a joke. Actually, all these Fox News stars, Bill O'Reilly's no longer a Fox News star, but all these guys put out these pop history that they get someone else to write for them and they become bestsellers. But it's more that just like, they're like, oh, Brett Baer's got a book out, I'm going to buy that. And they buy it and they don't read it. I think the liberals actually generally read what Ron Chernow puts out. So if you want an audience to actually read what you have, and if you want an audience to hope that you get a TV miniseries or a musical out of your work, then this is the market to appeal to. So I don't find it ironic because they're not irrelevant. They're just maybe not as important as they would have been 30 years ago. Like Dave McCulloch was read a lot more in the 90s than like Ron Chernow is now in the 2020s. And go further back, these books were much more important. To think about my Buckley podcast is that his books were selling a ton, and they would just be about his ski trips, and they would sell like 200,000 copies. Today, if you sell 200,000 copies, that's like a miracle. And you've got to write something really important. It cannot be about your random ski trip. And, that's, there's more people who are buying books back in the 70s and 80s than there is today. But if you want anyone to buy your book and you want people to read it, that's who you appeal to. So, it is funny that some of the demographic consequences are reducing the book buying public, but there's still plenty of old white liberals who will buy these books and read them. Let's see who else we've got. We had a question that was similar to, actually it sort of is. It's from New England Refugee. He's got a question. He said, what's a lower ring of hell, having to listen to David Frum show forever or the David French show forever? Oh, it'd definitely be the David French show. David French has no insight, no interesting things about him. Frum is much more interesting, has a lot more insight, has a far better grasp of history, and he will say things that are surprise you or something that you didn't think about. Frum, I think you can still be informed. You can still be informed from show. There is nothing you're ever going to learn from David French except how much he sucks. David Frum, you are going to learn something. You're going to get insight from. He does suck, but he is generally smart and generally has something interesting to say. French has nothing interesting to say. So 100% David French show forever. You might actually learn something from listening to David Frum. So that would be my easy answer to that. Has another question that I don't quite understand. He's like, is Laura Loomer the Omarosa of the Trump presidency? No, it's completely different. Omarosa didn't do anything with the Trump administration. She basically just briefly worked and got pushed out and then immediately turned on the Trump administration and was never committed to Trump as a president. It's just somebody from his old reality TV show days he brought along, and it turned out to be a failure. So Laura Loomer operating completely differently. She's a full-on loyalist who has far more influence over the administration because everyone in the administration is terrified that they will get attacked by Laura Loomer, that they'll get Loomered. And she's doing this on behalf of her loyalty to the president or her claimed loyalty to the president. So, no, there's no similarities between Laura Loomer and Omarosa. Doesn't really make any sense. There was not a Laura Loomer-like character in the first term. So that's my answers to him. Let's see. We got a lot of random questions today, or we got a bunch of questions. So Ken asked too, he said, how relevant has Project 2025 actually been to the Trump administration so far? Well, they've used pretty much a lot of their ideas for this administration. A lot of their immigration enforcement mechanisms, a lot of their ideas about curbing woke and DEI, a ton of all things about reforming the government, eliminating the birthright citizenship. They were talking about that before, but a lot of the Project 2025 ideas have become policy for the Trump administration, despite the Trump, campaign disavowing Project 2025 and wanting nothing to do with them. They then still took all these policy ideas and implemented them. And a lot of people involved in Project 2025, except for Paul Dans, who was the guy running it at Heritage, who's now trying to run against Lindsey Graham. He's not going to win. Lindsey Graham's going to win that, but everyone except for him has now entered the administration pretty much. So Project 2025 has been very influential and very relevant to the Trump administration. If you want to find the Trump administration policies, you can go back and look at Project 2025, and several of the things that they have implemented have become reality under Trump under the second term. So yeah, I think it's actually been very relevant. It is funny, what Democrats worried about is that this is going to be the Project 2025 administration, and then they're like, oh, no, that's not true. It actually has turned out to be true, which is actually a positive for us and a white pill for us, more so than anything. But it's funny that they're like, oh, this is a French thing that no one's going to pay attention. And then all the things that they had come up with is now they take that policy paper and then that becomes action under the Trump administration. So it is funny. Second question he has is, can you address the millennial leftist argument that woke was a natural and understandable response to the social insensitivity of the 1990s and 2000s, like that Howard Stern Butterface video that went viral? No, it's not it wasn't a response at all to the social insensitivity of the 90s and 2000s. And generally that's also social insensitivity was limited to just like Howard Stern, The Man Show, Girls Gone Wild videos. It's more the vulgar wave. I think Paul Scalise uses that term. I don't know if he came up with it, but he popularizes it. The vulgar wave that's associated with, it was big in the 90s and 2000s with all these comedies were sort of coming out. They were all obsessed with like big boobs and everything. I don't think that it had anything to do to a response to that. Because this was not popular stuff. This was shock jock stuff. This is things that everyone would roll their eyes at, our polite society would roll their eyes at and would condemn. But we kind of gave the masses more of what they wanted at the time, and was built on this type of vulgar, crude, sexual humor that was very big at that time. But woke itself has nothing to do with it. Woke is more a result of the development of the internet and leftists taking advantage of that to spread their message far and wide and to convince elites that they need to be even more left-wing to meet the demands of a multicultural, diverse society. And part of those demands and most of the demands were fixated on racial concerns, not so much the concerns of gender. I mean, I don't know who really wants that stuff back. People are just making those jokes because it's like, this is kind of outrageous that this woman was like attractive. And if you look on the street, especially compared to what you see, like she's thin and she's got a slightly weird face. I guess she's like, in that video, she's might be Arab of some sort. She does have a weird, strange face, but it's not like ugly. But that was, it's not like, oh, this is so awful, we need to have woke to stop this. No, that's not how woke came about. It wasn't an understandable or natural response to that. It was an understandable and natural development due to the development of the internet. And the internet allowing left-wing agitators and activists to have a bigger voice and more influence, and the development of online media, which was all captured by these activists and them enforcing their will on the general public. And so all of these insane left-wing theories that were restricted to campuses then broke free thanks to the internet and then took over the country. And now we're seeing this in reverse, where the internet is now purveying all of these ideas and concepts that were once restricted to the far right fringe, and now all these ideas and theories are being seen on normies reels. So it's a little bit different, but no, I don't think I don't think it had much of a role. No, people make that joke, but it is what it is, and it was just limited to a few cultural expressions of the '90s and 2000s. Men were allowed to be pigs. There was this encouragement to men to be pigs in that time period, which then they took that away as like, it was the brief time period of Hooters air. It's why like Hooters is like a relic, is that it was something that would have been, oh wow, this is normal in the '90s and 2000s. And now you're there, you're like, this seems out of touch with our current society. So no, and that is a casualty of woke, but woke was driven by other things. So that's my take on that. Octavian's got long theories about guilt and shame cultures. He says, in order to be great, one must be an outlier. However, according to some scholars, being an outlier, even if for a good reason, is more likely to be stifled in some cultures via shaming rituals. And he adds on, is this one of the reasons why Western Europe was the driving force for innovation for 500 years? Was it the greater tendency, partly from the influence of Christianity, to tolerate outliers? There's a tendency to take over companies rather than found them. Vivek's history in pharmaceuticals is eye-opening. I don't know if that's so much a result of guilt-based and shame-based cultures. I don't assign that much importance to that. We just allowed more. We had greater respect for the individual and him taking risks. We were certainly a culture that encouraged risk and the great individual to rise above his circumstances and rise above his odds to do things. We also have much more of a reason, rational based system that, owing from our philosophical heritage and a greater respect for science. And I think that's why we had greater innovation. I wouldn't put it to guilt and shame based cultures. No. That's a short answer, but it's something that I haven't really thought about, probably because I don't assign much credit to it, or I don't place much credit or substance for it, for explaining why the West is the way it is. I mean, I think the West is the way it is because the individualism we have also is a double-edged sword, but it's also allowed for greater innovation, a lot more pioneering, a lot more advances than other societies, as well as our greater respect for reason and rationality and figuring out things rather than just saying, oh well, Allah says this, so we're not gonna investigate this matter. So that's my thoughts on that. Deuteronormative has a quick question saying, your thoughts on the U.S. government taking a 10% stake in Intel. Is this good or bad in the long run? Did Trump do a fascism? I think it's fine. I mean, Intel is a part of our, relates to national security. We want those microchips being, we want to encourage American development of it. So I think it's fine, but I don't have that strong of take on it. Besides, I'm not bothered by it. If you wanted a longer answer, I don't have one, but I'm just not that bothered by it. It makes sense for us to put that much investment into the tech sphere that's developing stuff relating to our national security and is relating to our competition with China. So that would be my take on that. Maverick, also with a tech question, or something revolving tech, he said, thoughts on LED car headlights? It feels like since COVID, every new car has headlights that will nearly blind you when they get close by. Compare this to older yellow headlights that don't let you see as far, but also aren't a nuisance to the rest of the road. I actually really don't like the brights. I can understand if you live in a very rural area and you having to drive around at night and you need them. But most people aren't driving around at night in a rural area. They're driving around in an area where they've got street lights and stuff, and then this car is blinding you. And it's especially a problem on the interstate. And you'll have a car with the LED lights and you can see your mirror and stuff. No, I've always hated the bright lights. And people have used them to be assholes on the road and to force people, that they'll just like flash them and try to blind you to get on it. It's a way of just being like an asshole and not being conscious of people around you. And then you don't care if they get in accidents or whatever. You want to see no matter what. And yes, I think it's dumb. Certain areas you need it. If you're doing a lot of driving at night in an area without streetlights, then yes, I understand it. But if you're in an area where it's well lit, you don't need it. And so the only reason that you're having it is to be an asshole. So no, I'm not that much of a fan of them. I don't like the development of it. Brighter headlights just makes the driving experience worse. I'll do like night driving. It's very relaxing. No one's on the road. You got the tunes blasting. I liked a lot of music that's very night oriented, to say the least. And it's very relaxing, but having one asshole with a brights on, coming your way, or trying to tailgate you, it's an annoying factor. So, moving on to Arm Day Enjoyer. Actually, we go to Costco Frank because I wasn't meant. Or no, I already got him. Never mind. Sorry, I thought I didn't get his question. We'll go on to Arm Day Enjoyer. He said, his first question: some of these anti-matrix entrepreneurial types promote going to certain middle-income countries because it's cheaper. Is it really because the U.S. West is overpriced, or they just made a few bucks possibly through questionable means and need to move to a country where everyone's much poorer so they can feel rich? I don't think that's like much of a problem. If you work a remote job and you want to live a baller lifestyle, I understand like moving to Mexico City or Lisbon or, even the Gulf states, even though it might be more expensive than the Gulf states. But I think the dream is to like have a remote job and you're able to work in Europe. Because you get a lot of amenities and your dollar goes much further in Europe, and you live a certain lifestyle that you're not going to experience in the United States while in Europe, but you're making an American income. And so I don't really have much of a problem with that. As long as you're fine being seen as a foreigner. I don't really like being in an area where I'm seen as an outsider and I'm like, stick out like a sore thumb, So I wouldn't probably do that, but I don't really have a problem with people, making that choice. And I think it's very tempting and a dream to do that. For me, I wouldn't do that in Europe because even though I'd be a right-wing moderate here in America, I would still probably be a right-wing extremist in Europe, and I might get deported based on or face police harassment if I go over to Europe to do this type of stuff. But I can understand the temptation to do that. It's like you're able to live, a really nice lifestyle, and you're able to afford more while working remote. So I think there's nothing wrong with it. I don't have a problem with it. People want to do that, that's fine. The U.S. is definitely overpriced, and there's just certain things like our public transportation sucks. You need a car to get anywhere. The destinations, the best cities you want to live in, it's extremely expensive to live. While you could live in an awesome city in Europe, would be like living in Huntsville, or even cheaper than Huntsville. While you're living, a certain lifestyle that you can only dream of living in, say, New York City or Chicago or LA. So I have no real problems with it. Second question. You mentioned in your last IQ supplement, Buckley and Kennedy families were both anti-British WASP, yet they still wanted to make it in the upper echelons of U.S. society. I honestly don't get the logic of this. Do they just want their own cosplaying as WASP while they impose their own vision on the rest of the country? No, they just want to be elites. Everyone wants to be elites. If you want to be a part, you want to have power, you want to have that lifestyle, you want to be elite. They just want to be elites, and they imitated a lot of the WASP ways while not being WASP themselves. And you have to realize that the WASP that they were neighbors were not like the really right-wing types. These were libtarded WASPs. These were WASPs who were demanding intervention in World War II in 39. These are people who immediately took up civil rights as their cause. They were not the type of right-wing imagination we have of WASP that I think some people on online right Twitter get. It's different with like the WASP of the South, which were like generally right wing and reactionary. But in New England, these types were no longer that right wing or reactionary, especially their neighbors that they had. These were liberal interventionists who really cared about civil rights and, sympathized with communism, got really upset about Franco and other things. So these were not really people on our side. And so being anti-British was mainly for them being anti-libtard. Well, at least for the Buckleys. Kennedys were much more tied in with the Irish political machine and in that political conflict between WASP, who want a more disinterested, more virtuous type of politics, versus Irish machine, where it's like corruption's a matter of course. They're buying votes. There's these tawdry aspects of it which the WASP don't like, and that's more of a conflict with Kennedys and the WASP. Buckleys and the WASP were that the Buckley family was much more right wing, and the WASP were these liberal interventionists who had these silly ways, and that they were pro civil rights, while the Buckleys were realized civil rights were a bad thing, and the WASP were what's wrong with communism and socialism, while the Buckleys were fiercely opposed to communism and socialism. So it was a bit different. So it's not so much they're cosplaying as WASPs, they just wanted to be elites, and to be that, you had to imitate a lot of WASP norms, but they themselves were not a part of that. I wouldn't say it is like a form of subversion, but they were outsiders. And with the Kennedys, they definitely did want to replace the WASP as the elites. I don't think that was quite the case with the Buckleys. They liked being outsiders and contrarians and liked being different, but they weren't really challenging the WASP. They wanted the WASP to be more right-wing, I would say. So that would be my point on that. Now for Gillis Enjoyer. He said, did you see this tweet from Myron Gaines about how conservatives need to support bringing in refugees from Gaza? Do you think this will finally dispel the notion that the brocasters and Tate Sphere are actually right-wing and in truth are more so really third world, if anything? And what the hell's wrong with MTG for encouraging this stuff too? I don't know. So Myron Gaines is different from the brocaster. I mean, not a bit different. He is different from the brocasters. The brocasters are absolutely not third worldists. They're just bros who are rather apolitical. They have certain themes that they're into. They're anti-establishment, but they're not that political. They're generally anti-interventionists. Generally open to believing into conspiracy theories. Critical of Israel, and some of this, but their politics is not what drives brocasters. It's generally a bro lifestyle that drives them. They're not that political. Myron Gaines is a bit different. I don't know. Third worldist is overused. I don't really understand the point for it. It's like, okay, I'm very opposed to immigration, but Israel did this bad thing, and in order to, take responsibility for what America did, we have to take in these Gazans, which I guess there's an underlying point that the Gazans could be like supportive of what Myron Gaines' politics are, which might be true. I don't think the majority of them would, but there would be a lot of probably Gazans that would be into streamers and other things. But I think it's just a dumb take. No, I don't believe in bringing in refugees from Gaza. There's no base reason to bring them in. Okay, I'm one of the most important things with the Gaza struggle is that probably the most important thing is that we do not want to take in anyone from Gaza. And that's why we want the war to end, and that we can't support them ethnically cleansing Gaza. Because guess what? Even if a third country takes them, like somewhere in Africa, they're going to make their way to the West. And they're going to be an extremely radicalized population. I mean, for understandable reasons. And it'll probably, if they got ethnically cleansed, they would be a huge source for Islamic radicalism, and the West would have to deal with this problem for generations. We don't want that. Okay, so no, there are absolutely no reason for bringing in refugees from Gaza. No base reason whatsoever. We absolutely don't want them to do this. What's better is that we exert pressure on Israel to end the damn war and to not carry out its idiotic ethnic cleansing idea. And it's not annexing Gaza. It's done. You're not doing this because really what happens is the West is that we end up with Israel's mess and that we pay the consequences for it, not Israel. So I'm very much opposed to that. MTG, I think, is getting it. It's interesting, MTG going into this stuff. I think she got really mad that MAGA world or Trump world told her not to run for Senate and governor in Georgia and said they wouldn't support her. And I think that's why she's gone down this path. And she might try to run for office in 28. We'll see. But she's definitely really pissed because she in this comment of her trying to be more right-wing and based, she's also like, oh, Republicans are sexist. They don't listen to the women and trust them. I'm like, okay, when the women in Republican politics are represented by you, Boebert, and Nancy Mace, do you blame Republicans not listening to the women? Okay, so she's really mad that she didn't get any Trump world support for running for either Senate or governor, and I think that explains like her current path. I mean, she's saying interesting things, but it is that he wanted me to do Mike Denethor impression from Return of the King, like abandon your post, flee for your lives, but that's all I can really do. I don't know why you want to do that. That's not one of my more favored impersonations that I do, but I guess some people are like that. So I think we're just down to LK Rourke. Yeah, just LK Rourke. So if I missed your questions for today for any reason, just harass me and we'll get to it for the mailbag this week. And I will answer it for the show then. So we've got a couple questions from LK Rourke, and LK Rourke's questions are, once I pull it up, he says, 1, anti-video game old tunes have been calling up my timeline on X, suggesting that gamers are no different from Disney adults, suggesting we learn the guitar or write a book instead. Nothing against that, I'm following the latter myself, and so on. Can you please give these callers the Greta treatment? I don't know what the Greta treatment is, but absolutely, I think that's absolutely stupid. 1, when you're an adult, like people are like, you need to learn a guitar or learn some type of skill. I mean, it'll make you more attractive to women, I guess. But learning like that type of skill is hard. And when you're an adult, you actually have work. And you just want to settle in, turn your brain off, and have mindless entertainment. Video games are fine. As long as you're doing fine in the rest of your life, and you just want a way to relax, video games are perfectly natural way to relax. I don't play video games myself. I'm not due to opposition. It's that if I played video games, I would have time for nothing else. Generally what I do to relax, which isn't really relaxing because it's also work, is reading. But, if you want to play video games, that's perfectly fine. Telling people like, oh, go learn the guitar or write a book. Like, this is hard. That's not relaxing at all. Eventually, playing the guitar could be relaxing, but it's a tough skill that you have to stick with. You have to stick with hours and hours every day to get good at. And eventually, once you're good at, I can see it being relaxing. I know people who, I one time had a roommate who, he would work and then he'd go up and play on his keyboard. And he was like a really good pianist. And so he'd go and play on his keyboard and take a break for 30 minutes and then come back and get to work. And I know people like that. But you have to get really good to get to that point where it becomes relaxing and it's not like a hard skill for you to do. It's even more difficult than like working out because you're going to struggle, you're going to suck, you're like, that's it. And you just have to continue to practice. And it's why like it's better to learn a musical instrument when you're young, because you have all the time in the world to do this, and you've got no real stress. You're a teenager, so it's like you've got plenty of time to learn that type of skill. But once you're an adult, you don't have as much time to skill, especially if you got kids. It's primarily women who are pushing this, who want to ban video games because they just want to control male behavior and eliminate individual agency from them and just have them as some little like blow up doll that they, cart off to church and do whatever the woman likes, and then they have no hobbies to themselves. And conservative women are the most eager to have a man to have no life beyond the family and her. That you cannot have any personal hobbies or any individual downtime. Like, that's not allowed. And so that's why they hate video games. But I defend video games. It's relaxing. It's fun. You know, as an adult, you just want to turn your brain off and have mindless entertainment and chill out from a work day and chill out from everything else going on in your life. And it's a way to unwind. So I'm pro video game. I do admire people who have the time to play video games as adults. I don't. Or I found I don't have the time, but for people who do, they do. I enjoyed playing video games when I was a kid, so I'm not going to hate on it. And anyone who hates on video games, like, no, that's a red flag. That is the Longhouse trying to control us, so we're opposed to that. 2, he's got, no, these are all those other questions for the mailbag. Hold on, open it up. I think the Democrat frontrunner in 2028 will be AOC, who has the POC and socialist credentials and name recognition. Newsom is a meme. Trumpian style doesn't work without Trumpian substance, and Democrats don't want a white guy. For Republicans, I think how steadfastly MAGA they've been will make or break all conservative political careers for the foreseeable future. If Tucker runs, I think he will be the only candidate who could challenge Vance's MAGA credentials. If not, it'll be a Vance blowout. Absolute worst case scenario in 2028 comes down to DeSantis versus Kamala. Are my political instincts well attuned, or was this Elon tier? It's not Elon tier. I don't think it's I don't think Tucker's going to run. Tucker would not be a disciplined political candidate, and I think a lot of the stuff he would run on did not connect with voters. And he seems to not want to run. The person who's going to run a Tucker-like campaign would be Bannon or MTG. And I don't think Tucker is actually going to make that run for office. He might try to think about it, but I don't think it's actually going to do that. With the Democrats, we don't know. It's up in the air who the frontrunner is. It's all dependent on what's going to be the first primary state. If it's South Carolina, AOC is not the frontrunner. Maybe it's New Hampshire, Nevada. She might win that. But it's also a matter of, because Democrats are based around these interest blocks and your ability to win over these interest blocks to you. It's labor unions and also the varying different labor unions. It's a black vote, it's a Hispanic vote, it's a white woman, or it's the liberal woman vote, it's gay vote. There's the boomer vote. There's all these different elements within the Democratic Party, and generally how you can win over these elements. I don't think Newsom is as strong a force. He could still do this. I don't know why people think it's brilliant for him to just plagiarize Trump style and then do it as Gavin Newsom. A lot of times it just doesn't make sense. And to normie voters, they're like, I don't understand this. And it's not really winning over Democrats. It's just the idea that they've been desperate to try to troll or one-up Trump at Trump's own game, and they failed every time. And it's going to be the same with Newsom. Everyone's going to be, the brief bit of like Newsom enthusiasm, even on the right, is going to be forgotten about, and it's not going to carry on till 28. We're going to wonder, like, oh, did we really do that? And then people are like, yeah, that's kind of weird. So it's just not going to work out. I don't know if AOC is going to be a competitive candidate because she's the only one who's going to be running in that progressive lane. So far, I mean, maybe Rohana or somebody else runs in it. But I'd have to see if Rohana can run. He might not have been born in America. But AOC can run for high office, and she would still have a lot of things on her side if she wanted to run. So that's it. With the Republican primary, Trump is going to try to have it as presidential apprentice. He's going to encourage everyone to run so they can all compete for who will be most pro-Trump. And that will be it. DeSantis is never going to win the nomination under any circumstance. He still has the same problem, which is personality. He's not going to win. And also Trump is not going to like that he's going to seemingly be the least sincerely pro-Trump of those candidates. So I would not back on DeSantis. Kamala is a terrible politician. She doesn't have this. If she tries to run again, this is going to be easily discovered once more in the primary. I don't see how she could possibly win the primary unless somehow all black voters are behind her and South Carolina is the first primary state. But even then, I think that it still could be difficult for her to win. So I wouldn't say your political instincts are off, but I would take a little bit different views of how this primary will be. Vance is the clear front runner for Republicans. That could change. Maybe he has a falling out with Trump. Maybe Trump decides he likes someone else more. That could change. He's the front runner right now. There's no front runner for Democrats. Whoever you think is a front runner right now, it could be totally destroyed. There are so many things up in the air with the Democrats. What's the state of the economy? What message they're going to run on? What's going to be the first primary state? That there is no way to understand who the front runner is. Kamala is not the front runner, even though that's a polling shows that. Absolutely not. So that is my takes on that. And that is it for Highly Respected today. We're going to have more great content coming up this week. We're not going to have an article tomorrow because we had an article Sunday. We'll probably have one for Thursday. So be on the lookout for that. But everything else will be normal this week. Next week, I'm not sure because it's Labor Day. I do like to take off for the real holidays. I did not take off for July 4th. We had an IQ supplement on July 4th. So I feel that due to the fact that we had 5 days of content for July 4th, even though we did not have podcasts for the regular episode and the mailbag, but we did have 2 articles, I feel maybe I might be owed a day off. But we'll see, because we have way too many questions to answer for just one podcast. But if we don't have a podcast on Monday, I'll probably have written answers. It'll be a type of article on Tuesday, and then we'll have a normal mailbag on Wednesday, and then we'll have an article Thursday. So things will be there. But we might not have an episode next week, depending on the circumstances. It's up in the air. You almost want to have a work day there because Labor Day is kind of one of the more lefty holidays. It's, there are certain holidays. I unfortunately did not have. I did work on Juneteenth, but we didn't have an article because I think I was planning on having. I had an AmCon article that was coming out, but I thought it was going to come out on Thursday, but it came out the next day. So we didn't have the full content then that week. But we try to make a point of working on having content on Juneteenth and Martin Luther King Day. Labor Day, not as obviously left-wing, but most people, it's the last day of summer for people. So pools start to close. So you got to live it up. You got to enjoy the warm, the last day of official summer when you have it. So we'll see what we do. But that's just to keep in mind. We might not have an episode next Monday for the holiday. But everything else should be on normal schedule. So that is it for Highly Respected. Got more great content on the way, so be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.